a large frame church, and
this is pre-Civil War.
That's right.
Pre-removal.
Yes, pre-removal. This would 1824 is when Joseph McMinn. See, Joseph McMinn came in to be the Cherokee agent after Return Meigs had passed away, and he lived there for a year, and then he died. He lived in Calhoun, and he worked at the agency. But the cemetery is right there beside where the railroad came through, and so in 1862, December of 1862. The Union Army came through and destroyed that church. They dismantled it and used the lumber to build barracks and a pontoon bridge.
Oh.
And so after
which makes some indication that it was a large building,
right? And yes, because they were reimbursed $2,050 for it eventually.
Wow.
The Southern Claims Commission came into being, and then after that, there was still some follow up. They continued to request reimbursement for that. By that time, there was no longer a Presbyterian church in Calhoun, but there was in Charleston, and so they were reimbursed. And so $2,000.
That was a lot of money.
It was a lot of money.
Then.
So the building must have been fairly big. So the church building is not there, and that cemetery is inactive, but it.
Who maintains that cemetery? Because it's fairly nice.
It is. The Calhoun Community Cemetery Association that takes care of the other larger cemetery, they take care of that. It's really, it's nobody owns it. I looked that up on the records the other day, and, it's not really owned by
Benjamin
anyone.
Franklin said you can tell a lot about a community by how they treat their dead. So you can tell a lot about the community of Calhoun by how they maintain those two cemeteries. That's amazing. So there was a church there, and it was removed by the Union forces. Is that what you're saying?
That's right.
Wow. And
so that church, that I was telling your husband earlier, I said, what was interesting about that cemetery is that the descendants of the people that lived in that cemetery don't live in Calhoun. The descendants of the people in the cemeteries are the ones that are buried in the Calhoun Community Cemetery up by where the Methodist Church was. So I got interested in who was buried in the Shiloh Cemetery and why they were in Calhoun to begin with. And those people were it was more like a transient nature. There are several children. William Ballman built the Henniger House, and he had 4 children that passed away just right after he built the Henniger House. They all died within a month of each other in 1854. And but the people that are buried there, their families either moved into Bradley County after that became available, or they moved west, because I just was interested, and I would trace those families back on the census until I could see where they went.
So they were kind of transient people, and that's why they didn't have roots here, and so they just moved on to the next job or whatever. I know that my family was the Stevensons, and when you start tracing them, you have to figure out where did the railroad go, because they were actually people that engineered and built railroads, and so you can just kind of follow them. And they finally ended up in Tunnel Hill, Georgia, when the railroad was coming north and coming south, and it met right there. Well, there was no more work, so they just stayed there.
Right.
But it's kind of funny how you can, some transient people, you can just follow them by their occupations.
Right. That cemetery is located right beside. Of course, it was, started long before the railroad finally came through there, but the railroad runs right beside that, and there's a section that's between the cemetery grounds. There's trees, a tree line there, and then the railroad is there, and we know that there are some other markers that are back inside that tree line, and we suspect that there are some that are probably still covered. I'm going to look at it. I'm going to look at a note.
We've talked for 15 minutes, Ron. She's finally looking at a note. Ron's over here pushing buttons, trying to get us going.
I just wanted to say about that cemetery that.
Well, that may be where Jonathan Returns Meigs only is.
He may very well.
Because he's supposed to be in that cemetery, and I've walked it, and I haven't found him.
I just wanted to tell you that. While we were in there, and I said we've left because we got several other people interested in it. We uncovered, of course, we were going primarily by the WPA records, and it was walked in 1935, but there were 8 gravestones that we uncovered that had never been recorded anywhere. And I know, and I said, I think that probably as the railroad came through, the excavation of that caused some of the stones to be covered, and we unburied those, and so those were unidentified. And then there were 16 other stones that were covered up that had been previously recorded, but they were hidden. And so then it makes you curious about how many more are back there in the
way
trees.
back in the day, they kept somebody that was related to those folks had kept that cemetery swept clean. And after that generation passed, things got grown up and just ignored for a long period of time. And what I've seen happen to gravestones sometimes is the grave kind of caves in, and that makes the stone fall forward into the grave, and then it gets covered over by dirt and stuff. And sometimes if you'll just excuse me, I'm going to poke around here for a minute. You can find the stones down in there, but they're really hard to get up out of there.
Right. There is still one stone that's buried that is near the road that is totally illegible. That I've tried every trick that I know to try to read that. And then there is a stone that is actually a John Varnell, who was buried in 1842, and his stone was recorded as illegible. But have you ever taken aluminum foil?
No.
Oh my, this is a new trick.
Ron's going, oh no, protect the aluminum foil.
Can I share that?
Sure.
Well, it's harmless. It doesn't hurt the stone any. And so you just wrap aluminum foil, inexpensive, very thin, around that and secure it, and then take a light brush and brush that, and it will make the imprint that was on the stone. And I was able to identify John Varnell's few letters that were still on the stone and match it up with that WPA record. So I do know what that one was. So now our biggest mystery in that cemetery is there is a iron, I suppose it's made out of iron, grave cover. Are you familiar with that?
It looks like a child's grave.
It does.
Folks, if you go up there, and it's one of my favorite ones to go look at because I think it's so curious. It's probably during the Victorian times.
Right.
And you could, from Sears and Roebuck or places like that, Ron's got a picture of it up on the screen now if your internet's working better than mine. And that's
great.
I lost my train of thought. You could order those.
I hate it when you miss your train.
I missed my train. The train left without me.
Deb, real quick here. You're listening to Whoop FM 99.9, finally. This is Old Town Cleveland. You can call us here at 614-5553. We're going to open up the phones, and don't forget to call us here. If you got a question about the graveyards around the Charleston, Calhoun area, give us a call. We got a call. Good morning, caller. You're live on Old Town Cleveland.
Good morning, Ron. Glad to hear you on.
Hey, Bullet. Bullet called me earlier.
I don't know if we didn't pay our power bill or what there, but we didn't have power for about an hour.
Yeah, she actually told me a story about a snake, but we won't get into that.
Okay.
Ron, let me tell it real fast, Bullet. The other night after the storm, our pool was completely clogged up with stuff. Well, I stuck my hand down in the skimmer, which is usually things I won't do, but I was desperate at the moment to get it cleared out. And one of the leaves wrapped itself around my finger. It was a small snake.
You are listening to WOOP, Cleveland, Tennessee. Whoop FM is a broadcasting service of the...
Go ahead.
And Ron asked me what kind of snake it was, and I told him it was a flying snake because I threw it just about as far as I could throw it.
But I don't like snakes.
No, me neither.
You was talking about cemeteries this morning. Here about 5 years ago, I actually worked for Dale Moore. He'd send me and my brother to cover up graves, and I've been about every cemetery I guess there is, but I was going to ask Deb, your guest, do you know how many cemeteries there actually are in Bradley County?
I have no idea. I would think there's hundreds.
Well, they are, but like I say, I've actually been to, back 5 years ago, we actually covered, I had to give it up because about halfway when I got covered, my back gave out on me. But anyway.
Hey, Bullet, I know how many people have been buried in, how many dead are buried in those.
All of them.
All of them.
Ron, did you listen to the Cleveland game?
I sure did.
Well, did you hear my name pronounced on it?
No, I missed that. When did they say that?
Well, Terry Evans, I actually won the trivia quiz. and he pronounced my name about 4 times.
I started a little late, and then when it got to be 37-0, I think I quit listening.
They're supposed to call me sometime next week and tell me what my prize is.
Oh, they didn't know what the prize was. You just won it, though, right?
Yeah. The question was what was the anniversary of Cleveland? It was I said 50 years.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Yeah. And anyway, I'm just glad you're on. I'm gonna listen to you.
Thanks.
Hey, thanks,
well, I'm seeing in E.L. Ross's book that he listed 147 cemeteries in his book.
And that
does not include. That's 1971, and that does not include Fort Hill and the one next to Hillcrest. So he'd been to all of those, I'm sure. Ron, are we taking an 11 o'clock break, or we're just keep on rolling? We're just going to keep on rolling since we got on so late.
So you got a break all morning, Deb. Give me a break.
Gideon Morgan. Let's go back to him. What did he do in his lifetime? Was he a preacher, or was he a...
No,
I don't know.
I said, well, he was in the military, and I said then when he actually farmed the property, when he married a Cherokee woman who was the granddaughter of John Sevier, and
John Sevier, the Indian killer, had a granddaughter that was part Cherokee. Okay. Yes. It was a messed up time.
I know it. So of course his son was Joseph Sevier, and so she's the daughter of Joseph Sevier. But so therefore he was allowed a reservation, after the Hiwassee Purchase, when they were allowed to choose reservations. But he chose his property in Monroe County and ended up purchasing a lot of that. At the time of his death, I think he had about 30,000 acres. It's a huge amount. And he lived in Monroe County most of the time, but his connection to Calhoun, his family lived here, and he did live here when he passed away. But primarily he was a businessman. One interesting thing about Gideon Morgan was that I found a patent that he had filed and received. He died in 1851, and I think he got the patent in 1850, and it was for a track system, which actually, if you look up like Caterpillar tractors now and the track system that they used, you'll find reference to his name and his patent.
That is amazing. Straight from Calhoun, Tennessee. Let's get this caller.
Hey, go ahead, caller. You're live on Old Town Cleveland.
Yeah, Ron, Debbie, this is Sid. I'm calling from this car phone. I'm just learning to use it. But anyway, you have to talk about there was cemeteries up in Calhoun and around Charleston. My dad and brother and sister and all of them buried at that. It's that cemetery by that church, and it's a Baptist church at Calhoun, kind of on the outskirts there. It's been a while since I've been up there. I can drive you right to it, but I don't remember the name of the road. But anyway, what I was going to ask you, do you remember there was a Hollis, I think his last name was Maddox, I'm not sure, but he actually had got shot with a gun, and then everybody was going up there to take a picture. A gun actually was a stain in the tombstone.
Yeah, that's in the I call it the Charleston Cemetery. As you're going north on the highway, it's on the left-hand side of the road, and there was a robbery in Charleston, and I believe it was the police officer that they shot through his door. The robbers did, and he died.
Yeah.
Or I don't really remember. Somebody died, and supposedly for a long time up there on his grave, they said that you could see the impression of a hand holding a gun. Now, I've looked at it every way I can think to look at it, and I don't see that, but that's okay.
I couldn't see it either, but everybody else did, and I just couldn't see it. I thought, it looks like a regular stain in that graphite or whatever.
Yeah, that's what I thought too, but, people tell me things like that all the time, and oh, well.
And I just thought that was...
I just know that's the hottest cemetery in the world when the sun's shining bright, because there's very little shade in it.
Yeah, they thought that was an omen. Anyway, I got to tell this right quick.
Okay.
On the news one time, there was a guy actually run off up there in Lookout Mountain, and he didn't know he had his vehicle sitting there. It was a brand new SUV. And they said... He said, I got out of it just in time there when I parked, and he said, it rolled plumb down the hill and totaled that brand new SUV of mine, and they was interviewing me from one of the newscasters on 3, 9, or 12, and they said, well, do you think this is some kind of omen that you barely got out in time? He said, gosh, no. He said, that was a brand new one.
Thank you, Sid. We'll see you later.
Okay, bye-bye.
Hey, you can call us here at 614-5553. We're talking about cemeteries up in the Charleston, Calhoun area. Or if you have a general cemetery type question, one of these two ladies probably can answer just about anything there. If they don't really can make it up. It's right here. We got another caller. Good morning. You're live on Old Town Cleveland.
Good morning, Hero.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I cannot complain.
Yeah, well, you could because you was off the air for an hour.
Yeah.
Yes, we were. We got to take our break early today.
There you go. Hey, just want to remind everybody next weekend that the Old Cafe will be open for Labor Day.
That's right. Well, good. And and that's where I stop and get my biscuit at every morning. Jeff takes care of me. Usually, when I walk in the door, they make it for me. So.
Well, they need to come in because we may be running specials for next weekend for Labor Day if they don't want to cook.
Oh, well, that's good. And then now you have a sort of hot meals too during the week. You had like meatloaf one time, and you got any idea what you're going to have this week?
We don't have no idea what we're having this week.
That's kind of like the menu at home. It's just it's always good, whatever you get.
So if people like surprises, you're the place to go, right?
The rumor that I'm getting is we're having ham and cheesy hash brown casserole.
Uh-oh. Well, I just may have to head that way, mine.
Thanks, Jeff.
Y'all
have a good day. Bye-bye. Go by and see our friends down at Old Cafe at the Oasis.
Right as you enter historical downtown Cleveland. That's right.
Yep. So I've had so many people ask me about E.L. Ross's book, and I used to carry it around in a notebook because I started doing genealogy after this book was out of print. And thankfully, when the library had to replace theirs, they gave me the old wore-out copy, and I was so excited because mine weighed about 15 pounds, and I was having to carry it around with me.
Good morning. You're live on Old Town Cleveland.
Can you tell me the Charleston Cemetery, how old is that cemetery?
I'm sorry, which cemetery?
It's up in Charleston, Tennessee.
Okay. Well, there's several in Charleston. As you're going up the highway, the one on the left is kind of the community cemetery, isn't it, Laura?
And at one time it was called the Charleston Methodist Cemetery. That's how it's listed on the WPA record.
Yes.
Isn't that odd? Because the Methodist Church, of course, is not close to that.
No.
But it is a community cemetery.
It's been there for a long time. Probably after the Civil War, though.
I know there are Civil War veterans that are buried there, but I've not researched that one well enough to.
And then we have the Cumberland Presbyterian Church that was built in 1860, 1859. Yeah. There's people buried there probably a few years after that. I don't think there's anybody buried there that's, 1860. And then we're going to talk about the big cemetery here in just a second. But
the Charleston Cemetery?
Yes.
Okay, can you tell me, while I've got you on the phone, who takes care of the land up there, the graves and everything? Do you know?
In Charleston?
Uh-huh.
I don't know. And Laura doesn't know either.
Now, Darlene Goins, if you're listening to this, call in and
let us know.
Let us know that.
The folks up at the Hiwassee Heritage Center might be able to give you a lead to that.
Okay, the reason I was asking is I have family buried up there, and I try to take care of it when I can. Mm-hmm. But I have noticed when they mow up there, they have knocked the markers down. There's people that's been buried up there since 1800s, and they're just laying down on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
The families are.
It's really hard to get them up once they've fallen down. I've just think some of them just fall because they're get top heavy. But yes, it's real easy to bump them with the mower. It just happens. But yeah,
and that's a difficult place because that's on a hill.
And and there are vandals too who like to go through there and just kick those over. That's sad, but that happens also.
Oh, okay. Because I noticed some of them just is broken half.
Well, yeah, some of them just they weren't made to be here as long as they've been there, and they just the old material just falls apart sometimes. Heat and water
and vandals and
then vandals hit
animals
on them.
Yeah, it's sad.
It sure is.
All righty. Thank you so much for listening, dear.
With me.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
We got the phones wound up here this morning. They missed us while we was off the air. So,
can I go back to one other thing about Shiloh before I forget?
Ahead.
When I was talking about the mystery of the grave cover, that we were talking
the metal
about.
grave.
And there was also another little documented interesting story that, of course, Joseph McMinn was buried there and in an unmarked grave. And so in 1880, the county officials wanted to, do you call it disinter? What is the right word?
They wanted to
move him. They wanted to dig him up and move him to a place of a larger honor, I guess, because they thought it was in lowly Calhoun and they were going to move him. And he even prepared a place for that. And Return Jonathan Meigs Only, our little character preacher, was the only person that knew where he was buried.
Mm-hmm.
And
he said an elderly man.
I ain't telling.
An elderly man had told him when he was a young man. So he said he knew exactly where the grave was. And he, being the character that he is, he probably did. And he said, "No, I'm not telling you."
Or being the character was, he probably didn't know and he just said he did.
So did they actually bring the marker to Calhoun, or was that?
I think it may be a different one, because I've seen a picture of a base that's somewhere in Athens, and I can't remember where that is, but anyway, because it has McMinn on the bottom of that. And so he didn't tell them, and so they erected that large.
And they were not happy with him. Let's get this call.
Go ahead, call. You live on Old Town Cleveland.
Ron, that lady just called in and asked about that cemetery.
Yes.
It's the city of Charleston supposed to be maintaining that.
Okay, thank you.
All righty, thanks. That sounds about right.
Yeah, I thought maybe.
It's a big expense to little communities to take care of I know that I'm on the board for Fort Hill and the historic part, which is the northern part of that. I don't remember now, but it seems like it's about $30,000 a year to get that mowed and weed eat and stuff, and that's with us using some labor from the police force too. Prisoners. That's the word I was looking for. Yes. I can just see the chief deputy out there mowing. No.
Now, Bryant Smith, the new chief deputy, could he be good at mowing, I believe.
We're going to say happy birthday to our daughter, Ashley Moore Coleman. We saw her this morning over at the diner on 1st Street. Happy birthday, Ashley. And the Main Street Car Show is today. Let's go out and support those folks. Take you a good cold bottle of water with you and wear a hat. And
I heard something last night at the ball game that this might be a good thing. Is if you go to stadium, say it's a stadium first down, another stadium first down, you get a 10% discount this week. They were the sponsor of the first downs at the ball game last night, and they kept saying that. So even if you weren't at the ball game, I think if you go over to Stadium Barbecue and say another stadium first down, you'll get a 10% discount this week. So
my favorite,
save $1, and they
their
said
pork sandwiches.
Their smoke is no joke.
Yeah.
Hey, here's
right
another caller. Good morning, live on Old Town Cleveland.
Hello, Rod.
Hey, Miss Ella.
Were you trying to call earlier?
No, ma'am, I wasn't.
Okay, because we were off the air and our phone was lighting up, but we couldn't answer it. And I said, I bet that's Miss Ella trying to call in. So how's Miss Ella this morning?
I went out last night with my son. We went to this bar that told jokes. And I didn't know I wasn't supposed to get up there and dance. His girlfriend kept telling me, get up there and dance, get up there and dance. So I did. They all clapped for me.
Now, remember, this is a family radio station, so don't tell any of those jokes. You're going out and listening to dirty jokes at night. We don't want to hear them this morning.
He's just picking on you, Miss Ella.
I know he is. He loves picking on me.
Yes, because I love you. That's right.
And,
but I know your marks. I can't have you.
Huh?
I know your marks. I can't have you.
Yeah, be nice.
And I'm married too. See.
Huh?
I'm married, and you're marks.
Oh.
Anyway, he rides around down there. I saw his motorcycle.
Oh, all right. Well, is this out in Iowa?
No, it was in Hemet. Boise.
Iowa.
Yeah.
Idaho. I'll get it right here in a minute. All right, Miss Ella. Hey, good hearing from you.
Bye-bye, dear.
Bye.
Don't dance too
bye-bye.
hard. Bye-bye. Don't break a hip.
I wish Mark would leave her alone.
Oh,
right,
well.
Go ahead, Deb.
My internet's still not up, Ron. So if folks are talking to me on the internet, I'm so sorry. I can't see it this morning, but we're going to carry on.
And you're listening to Whoop FM 99.9. Finally, we were out about an hour due to some unfortunate power issues in the area down here. There was no power.
I think it was backfire.
It was
blew up the
very,
radio.
It was very unique. Half of the mall, the Village Green, was out, and half of it was on. The radio station happens to be in the part it was off, and the bake shop was out, and Starbucks, and the red lights in areas. So we had power issues for some time.
It was quite exciting.
You can call us here at 614-5553. Today we're talking about the cemeteries around Charleston and Calhoun. If you got a question, give us a call. Or if you have family members there and have some questions about that, give us a call also.
Across the way there from Shiloh is the big Baptist church that has the big cemetery back behind it. Now, the Methodist church was actually in the cemetery there at some point in time.
That's correct. The Methodist church was founded in Calhoun in 1820.
Wow.
Some say that it was in 1819, which would have been at the time of the Hiwachi Purchase, the Treaty of 1819.
So they
but we know it was
the
founded by
community
1820. And so when you think about that, we've talked about that was United States property then. But when you looked across the Hiwachi River, you were looking at still Cherokee territory.
And I think there's something to be said, too, for the folks that were living and working in Charleston, which was Fort Cass then, during the removal. Their family members are buried across the river in Calhoun.
Right.
I wonder if there was some...
I think the early connections were probably made with that church. John Walker founded the town of Calhoun in 1819 in his home down in town, and they built a log cabin to use for a courthouse, and that was the founding of McMinn County, and there was a county seat until 1823, and it was moved to Athens. But when we are not quite sure what the original church building would have been, but we do have records related to that, founded in 1820. The earliest burial in the cemetery is 1823, and it is a McCarty child who was a relative of. It's not John McCarty's son because the dates are not right, but it has to be the son, the child of one of the McCartys that's moved into the area, and there are several McCartys then that are buried in there, and of course that's buried in that same line with the McCartys is Allen Bird Grubb, who was a surgeon. He was here as a doctor working with the Creeks and the early on at the Creek Agency. I've seen records of that, but he was the physician for the Cherokee Regiment at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend. So I know there is great history in that cemetery.
Our son-in-law's a Grubb out of Meigs County, or his family are Grubbs, and I asked him this morning. He said I hadn't gotten back that far, but we really hope that he's going to end up being related to him.
Related because there are,
and he was one of the markers from the War of 1812. You guys had him marked.
That's right, and so.
I think that let me pause here and say I think one of the greatest things about that big cemetery, folks, if you're going north on North Lee Highway, you're going through Charleston. First of all, go very, very slow. Go through Charleston, go across the river. When you get to Hardee's, take a right. You'll go under the railroad bridge, and I believe it's Church Street.
It is.
And turn right and go behind that big, beautiful church, and you'll see this gorgeous cemetery that's always kept immaculately. And you'll see a gazebo. And the gazebo is sitting where the old Methodist church once stood.
Right.
Which I think is really nice that they marked it. But when you get out, and one of the reasons, or one of the ways that Laura and them have found the oldest graves are they were right there where that old building was.
Right, and they still center around where the gazebo is. We have a picture of the oldest picture we have of the church was made in 1910, and so see in that you think about it from 1820 to 1910 is almost 100 years that we're not sure what the building looked like, but we do know that. And so see that what I was going to say was the town of Calhoun was established, and so even when the Cherokee Agency was moved across the river, a lot of the people that worked at the agency lived in Calhoun because that was the town. That's where the post office was, and that's where the stores were, and that's where the churches were. And so that's one reason that those graves date back that far.
Now, John Walker lived in what's now Calhoun. McMinn County was organized at his home, I believe.
That's right.
And I think that probably his ferry was right there where it says Cherokee Crossing. There's a little roadway called Cherokee Crossing.
Right. The best that we can tell is that if you just continued down Main Street, right down in town, we have the 1819 plat of the town that was done by Temple and Ross, and we are in the process, Joe Bryan, if you're listening, of overlaying the plat with an aerial photo that we have that was made in 1920 and a current, Google Earth map. But if you look at that aerial map of the town, that plat matches still. You can see it exactly. You can see the way that it's marked off. But Main Street would have dead-ended right down into the river if you had continued going there, and that's identified as Walker's Ferry. And so
now there was a bridge there early.
Right. There was a bridge there. Of course, there were earlier even than we know. I'm sure there were pontoon bridges that were there, but there was the first bridge did Main Street, the old Highway 11, the first concrete highway, continued on across the bridge and would have gone over into Charleston and wound around through what, is Market Street, was Highway 11 and continued on through there. So that was the first concrete highway in Tennessee.
And part of it's never been paved over.
That's right.
And when you go down by what's now First Baptist Church, I think it's the Baptist Church up there in front of Cumberland Presbyterian Church.
No,
is that right? That's another street.
That's right.
But you can see the markers, the historical markers, but that ran for hundreds of miles, and that's probably the biggest strip that's still uncovered.
One of the things I find very interesting about that area, and we'll get this call here in just a second, is that the river was literally the separation between the United States and another nation. We had two nations there right here in our community, and just the stories from that. And luckily a national park is coming this way eventually for Charleston, for Fort Cass and the Trail of Tears. So let's get this call. Good morning, live on Old Town Cleveland.
Hey, Ron, this is Bob K.
Hey, Bob, how are you?
Buddy?
Good, I'm enjoying your program, and I tell you why I called, Ron.
Okay.
And of course, I think but my great-great-grandfather, Amos Ladd, is buried in Cookson Creek at the old home place. Back then, they had their own burial spaces on their land.
Right.
And what I need to know, I haven't been able to do this, I need to know who owns that property. I'd like to get their permission where I could keep that cemetery clean. And then also, if possible, if they would, I'd like to buy that plot to keep it in our family.
Now, Bob, it could be a possibility that's already been deeded off to the county or something, so that way a lot of people do that sometimes so that they won't have to pay taxes on it. So it could be county property already.
Now, is this Polk County, Bob?
Yes.
Cookson Creek.
Right past Cookson Creek Church on the left. It's the old Ladd Cemetery.
Like I said, I would think most people now under law they have to give you a provision to go in and view your graves there, so they can't keep you from that.
Just always ask permission, and I know you would.
I would think that most people would not mind if you cleaned it up, but I would ask for the people, or it may be already deeded to the county. Like a lot of times they would do that; they would deed it so they didn't have to pay the property tax portion of it. Now, but it could just be in the family, whoever owns the farm now, and I'm sure...
I would go to Polk County Courthouse, to the Register of Deeds office, and tell them what you need, and let them help you through the tax records, find out who the current owner is.
I believe that's Randy Yates over there, isn't it?
Well, that is a good idea.
That's just the best thing to do, and then you could get in contact with them and get permission, and I'd say, as my mama used to say, wait till the snakes are froze out before you go.
don't know what I could do. I could call Red. Get Red go there with me.
Oh.
Yep.
And shoot out the snakes.
That's right.
Hey, how many graves are in there?
Well, there are approximately 20, 25 graves.
Yeah, I'm sure someone would help you. And I tell you, we found also that sometime the Boy Scouts are looking for an Eagle project, their Eagle Scout badge.
Oh, yeah.
They will put together and clean. I know Deb had a group do that for a cemetery here in Cleveland and actually cleaned it up.
Yeah, and sometimes I've seen, Bob, where people will leave provisions in their will, set up a trust fund so the cemeteries can be cleaned after they're gone. And I'm just kind of mentioning that to everybody. That might be something that they want to do with their old family cemeteries.
Yeah, that is an idea. Well, I appreciate the help.
Thanks, Bob.
If you need any more help, Bob, give me a call.
Talk to you later.
All right, thank you, Bob. Good question there. You know, that,
I was thinking that Amos Ladd was buried over straight across 411 Highway on Ladd Springs Road.
well,
But
I'll have to just get into you on all that now. I have to admit.
sometimes when I think stuff, it's not exactly accurate anymore.
But I was saying there that you know, of course, the Two Nations there. We know that the National Park is coming in. We're going to have some activity. Finally, one of the most historical communities or areas in the nation is not marked the way it should be, and we're going to change that thanks to people like Darlene Goins and
Relentless.
Woody.
They have not
all those
let up.
people. And
They
so-
have not let up. And Faye Calloway cracked me up because when she first started coming to meetings and stuff, well, they'd be some big national speaker talk, and she'd go stand in line. When are you going to come to Charleston?
Right.
And she drove people in from all over America here, and that's one reason we're getting recognized.
Good morning, live on Old Town Cleveland.
Hey, Ron and Debbie, how's it going?
Great.
Good morning. What's up?
Oh, just listening to the show while I'm mowing the yard, and I thought I'd give you a little information on that question.
Okay, go right ahead. I thought you were the person I was going to reference to anyway.
The assessor of property will have maps that will show where all those places are located, if they have ever been put on the map, or anybody ever come in and talked about it. But a cemetery is the one piece of property in any county that the assessor can automatically exempt, but he should have a record of it.
Okay, good. Okay, and then if it's not
When you guys are out surveying and you see one of those little family cemeteries, you guys document that, right?
Yeah, we try to, and people will come in and tell us about a family cemetery. With the aerial photography that you've got today, a lot of times you can find stuff that you never knew existed because it's stuck in the middle of the farm somewhere where you may never have been.
Well, Arnold, I'll always look to where there's a clump of cedar trees. And if you can't see the graveyard, I go look under the cedar trees first.
But anybody that's got a family cemetery on their property and everything, that's probably one of the few things you can probably get exempt pretty easily as long as you can find the gravestones and everything. But assessors usually have records of the cemeteries that have been brought to their attention, and a lot of times they'll have a deed reference where you can go back and look at who actually owns it, or you can look at who owns the property around it.
Now, how often do they get deeded over to the county, or just people deed them off? Does that happen a lot?
Not really. Those family cemeteries like that almost never get deeded over as an actual deed of record.
Mm-hmm.
Now, properties that are bought by churches and by like Hillcrest Cemetery, Fort Hill, places like that, you can find deeds on them a lot. But the little family plots, once they're brought to attention, they're exempted off the books, and nothing's ever said about them again.
Yeah. They just don't really sometimes
And
belong to anybody.
Is Yates still the person you need to see over there?
Randy Yates would have the maps and the ownership information that you can start with, and if he doesn't have it, he should be able to point you in some direction in the Register of Deeds office to look for records there.
Sounds good, Arnold. Thanks.
Okay, y'all have a good
Get
day.
back on that lawnmower.
Is it as hot today as it was last night?
Not quite yet.
It got a little warm there at the ball game last night, didn't it?
Yeah, it got a little warm. That's why I'm out mowing now instead of this afternoon.
Smart man.
Thanks, Arnold.
See you.
Bye-bye.
I give Arnold homework assignments. I need to know who owned this piece of property. He does his homework quite well.
He works for the assessor of properties and all over the area here. He knows he can help you with all those type of questions.
That's great.
Yeah, it's always fun to have a friend like that.
You're listening to Whoop FM 99.9. This is Old Town Cleveland. You can call us here at 614-5553. We're talking about the graveyards around Charleston, Calhoun, or anywhere else you want to talk about. If we don't know it, we'll make it up. I promise you. 614-5553.
Who's the oldest? What's the oldest grave in that big cemetery?
It's the 1823 was the McCarty child.
I know
that when you think about that, right? And before I forget, I was looking back. I did make some notes before I came. I really don't have all of this memorized, or wouldn't claim it if I did.
She had it memorized. She just wrote it down for today, though. It come off her outer.
So I wouldn't lose out. Yeah. Well, we were talking about the people that worked in the agency across the river, but lived or used the cemeteries, were buried in cemeteries because there were not churches, in the Cherokee Nation. Yeah. And so Lewis Ross, who was the brother of John Ross, who operated a business there in the agency and lived there, he had a 2-year-old daughter, Sarah Elizabeth Ross, who passed away.
Ron has her picture up on the internet.
Okay, good. When I said she passed away while they were living there, and so she's buried there, and we're working the quality of that grave. I said it's really needs to be refurbished a little bit.
At some point in time, it had 4 concrete posts with little metal rods that made like a little fence around it, and she has a DAR marker for some reason, and it's getting kind of what will be done to that grave.
Well, in fact, we have taken part of that down, and you're right about that. We looked at that old 1910 picture, and we could see the post, how it originally was done. And so we're planning to call somebody that knows more about cemetery restoration than we would, because we don't want to deface it in any way. And we were talking about the Methodist Church was there, and of course I grew up as a little girl in that Methodist church, and that was the only yard around the church was the graveyard, and we played in it and had Easter egg hunts and everything else. We always called her our Indian princess. And I said, so some people think graveyards are creepy, but I said we didn't really ever think that.
Yeah, we just played in.
I know it.
But I went to visit her mom and dad's grave out in Oklahoma, and her Uncle John's grave, and at the very moment that I was standing at the base of the grave, I said, I know when they left Calhoun that they sure hated to leave her behind.
Yes.
That's what I thought.
I know.
Now, when did Bankman County, when did the Cherokee Nation, when did that become Tennessee in the United States, not the Cherokee Nation? Do you remember what, is it?
1819, so.
Yeah,
not 18.
Now, John.
No, you mean.
1719.
1819 was the Hiwassee Purchase, and so north of the Hiwassee River, became United States territory. And then I said I should probably remember.
So they're 20 years ahead of Bradley County.
That's
then.
right. It was almost 20 years then, before the final treaty.
But this little baby being buried in Calhoun is when I went, we didn't, they weren't burying people over in Fort Cass at that point in time that we know of.
Right.
We know that there were some burials down close to Rattlesnake Springs there from the removal, we think. There's some graves there on John Moore's property.
Are there?
Who are the some of the soldiers from 1812?
Everything's got a little aside. I always feel like I need to give some history or some credit. And we stopped using the word coincidence. We decided serendipity is a better word for that, because there's so many things that were going on with that. We were curious about, in the cemetery, the church was there. Of course, it was torn down when we built the new church. After Bowater came in, the town grew, and we outgrew the church, and so we built a new church out on the Bowater Road.
And so the building was actually torn down, or was it moved or reused?
It was torn down. We are so sad about that now, but in the late 60s, it was torn down.
It was a time of progress.
I know it. And I said, thankfully, that the area that little spot was rescued there, and in 1986 they built the gazebo and it's called Meditation Park, and they still use it for sunrise services for the church, and so it's still a special place. The Baptist church was built about 50 years after that. See, the Methodist church was started in 1820, and the Baptist church was started in 1874, and we have have a picture of that original church, and it faced out toward the Bowater Road. And, of course, it's been rebuilt and expanded on, too. But what I was going to say...
So both of the churches were there side by side, the Baptist and the Methodist operating.
At one time, yes.
And burying, both places burying.
That's right.
Okay.
And there's a section of the cemetery that would be on the south west corner of that was the Saul Paul family cemetery. And when the WPA did their records and continuing in some of the other records, that may be listed separately for anybody that might be interested in that.
I just stare at that Saul Paul monument. It has a big angel on top of it. It's gorgeous.
I'll put that up. Saul Paul, tell me what's the origin of that name. Is that... Do anybody know?
I don't know their history. I said I have access to a book about their history, but I didn't bring that one with me.
Yeah.
But that is interesting to me. I said I even thought about.
I've
Saul
heard it, Laura,
Paul.
but I can't remember what it is.
They had a meal there.
They did. They
quite
moved
wealthy.
in. Right. He was worked with. He wasn't a stonemason, but that was the business that he was in, and built bridges. And I think came in to build some of the bridges north of there. And then they did out on the. John Walker had 2 reservations, and so hit the Walker's Mill reservation.
Pretty sure that the Barnell farm across the river from the Saul Paul would have been is someone married.
They're related somehow.
Yeah, someone married from
yes,
the Saul Paul,
a Saul Paul married a Varnell.
Kate Saul Paul married a Varnell.
Right, and so
they're connected too, and that was originally the Bates farm. That's called Bates Bend, and William Bates is buried in the Calhoun Cemetery. See, and of course their family eventually went over. But what I was going to say was there's a big empty spot there in that old part of the cemetery where no one is buried, and it's always been a mystery to us. There was a small section of that we have found out had some small field stones in it that are either were moved or have been compacted into the ground. But there was that open area, and so out of curiosity, a gentleman came and doused. Do you know
Barry
him?
Phillips?
Okay,
yeah.
and he came.
But he came riding up on his motorcycle. Made a grand entrance.
And so he came and was going to douse for those. Just to see if we could recognize anything. And we were over in the cemetery that day, and a lady pulled up in her car, and she got out and said, "My 5th great-grandfather is buried in this cemetery, and I want to see about getting him a marker because his grave is unmarked." And I said, "Who is it?" And she said, "It's John L. McCarty." And I said it was the oddest thing. I mean, that's one of those things that was meant to be, because his original marker had been there and was broken in half, and we were pretty sure that's where it was. So that's how the interest in the War of 1812 really got started. And so she ordered a military marker for him because his grave was unmarked. All the other graves in the cemetery, the military graves, are marked. It may be private markers, but it's not like a totally unmarked grave. And so there are 5 War of 1812 veterans in that cemetery and 2 down in Shiloh. And so back in April, we had a commemoration service, and we had ordered some small supplemental markers that we placed at the foot of the existing markers to identify those as war veterans, because there was no way to know, and that part of history was going to disappear, and to be sure to acknowledge their participation.
So you had Dr. Grubb,
right?
McCarty,
right?
Bates.
Yes, William Bates, Gideon Morgan, and Benjamin Ahl, A-H-L is his name, and his
A-H-L,
right? And they part of his family married into the Liners, and the Liners are buried up closer to the Hiwassee Baptist Church, and so there was that connection. And then there was a William McCauley and John Pickens are the other 2 veterans that are in the Shiloh Cemetery.
I would wager to say that even at Fort Hill, we don't have that many War of 1812 soldiers. I think it's because they were all living there in that area, working with the agency.
See, like
and
John
stuff.
L. McCarty was a clerk for the Cherokee Agency when it was still at Hiwassee Garrison, and when they moved the agency to which
was like 1818 or something, something like that.
20. Well, yeah, or 1820-ish. I was looking back at the dates, but right in there, just about the same time as the Hiwassee Purchase was made.
if you know of a grave that's an 1812 or a Revolutionary War soldier, McMahon or Bradley, the Sons of the American Revolution, remember that organization, we like to find those, and we like to provide markers for those.
Or we just need to document it somewhere.
Yeah. Well, the SAR will come out and get help with some.
You know, I've got a War of 1812 soldier in my family, Peter Greenfield, and all it says in the newspaper is Peter Greenfield, an old soldier, age 104, passed this week, and he's buried in the community cemetery. Well, I have to assume it's the one at Mount Carmel, but I don't know that. You know, but that's so disappointing, because you think, okay, I found him. Oh, I didn't find out any more than I already knew. I knew he was dead. And that's right. You know, and I knew he was a War of 1812 soldier, and I knew he lived to be an incredible age.
And I think here in Bradley County we only have one Revolutionary soldier. We got the second one now.
We think we found a second one, but I think that they're trying to confirm it.
Well, you know, we went to a dedication not too long ago. Where was that at?
Out close to Hopewell or White Oak.
Yeah.
It was on White.
Was that an 1812?
The Beatty Farm.
Was that an 1812?
That was the Lee Cemetery, and Mr. Beatty takes care of it. Yes. And that was a Revolutionary War soldier.
Yeah, I think that would be the second one we have.
The second one. We know that there's one buried down in the Black Fox community, but we just don't know exactly where.
And it's a little ironic. Joseph McMinn is a Revolutionary War soldier, and that grave has no recognition of that either.
Oh, you need to call Fred Underdown, and he's a member.
Because it explains, you know, on his marker, you know, it talks about where he was from, but there's no acknowledgement that he was a Revolutionary War soldier.
We'll have to get Fred on that.
Our Mr. Lusk is buried down on his farm on top of a big old red hill. And so it's not someplace that they would allow the public to go in there and see it, but it's not like going up to the cemetery and finding it. The cemetery here was started in 1836. I really suspect there were graves there before 1836, but to my knowledge, there's not a Revolutionary War soldier at Fort Hill.
Or we just haven't figured it out yet.
Yeah.
You're listening to Whoop FM. This is Old Town Cleveland here on 99.9, or you can go to the internet at www.whoopfm.com. You can call us here at 614-5553. This was a short version today because we didn't have power for an hour, and so we had great conversations out, and we should have recorded what we said out there. That was with some of those stories we couldn't tell to the public, you know. But you know those secret stories, you know. But
secret handshakes.
But we're talking about Charleston and Calhoun cemeteries up there, and just tremendous history in that area on both sides of the river. There, it's amazing. They say it was the Cherokee Nation and the United States there, and like you said, some of the people who worked in the Cherokee Nation actually were buried over in there.
The nice thing is a lot of the property is still all intact. There's not huge subdivisions built on top of it and stuff. And when the National Park Service was here, they could take that 1835 immigration map and find those spots. And that is why we're going to be able to mark so many of those spots, and you'll be able to drive in your car, pull off on the side of the road. There'll be a marker there telling you what happened in that spot, and it's going to be an encampment where Indians were held, or it's going to be where the federal Army had their headquarters, or one of their little checking points.
And now Fort Cass, basically, it wasn't one of those forts like you see in the Western cowboy movies. It wasn't a little fence post. They may have had some of that, but basically Fort Cass was 4 miles wide,
12 miles long.
12 miles long, which nearly brings it down into what's in today's Cleveland. But from the river,
more
4
like
miles.
Where Bradley Square Mall is.
Yeah.
That area.
That's actually in the city of Cleveland now.
Yeah, it sure is.
It didn't used to be, but it is now. Yes.
But there's just a lot of interesting things that went on. I want to kind of put a little side note here. All of you will be familiar with what's now Hardwick Farms. C.L. Hardwick, not the one that started the foundry, but his nephew that was named C.L. Hardwick, in 1930 bought what was Hardwick Farms, and he paid the huge price of $12,000 for that farm. And I thought, I'll double his money and just take what's left of it. But it was around the big spring there that was behind Mr. Hardwick's house. I would almost wager to say that that would be a pretty good location for Jack Walker's house to be, but some people have that a little bit south of there. But anyway, it was called Silver Springs Dairy, and it was a huge farm, sold for $12,000. I thought that was kind of funny.
That is funny.
And it's always fun to find those little tidbits in the old newspapers, isn't it?
You're right.
I was looking for something else and just saw some little public notice that said that he had bought the property out of some, like a estate or something.
Right.
What else do we have there?
Well, I said when you think about cemeteries and we were talking about that unidentified area, and the dowsing did not show any graves in that area either. So we're not sure if that was a grove of trees that would have been
an outhouse.
Who knows what?
I mean,
was.
You would not have. If where you had your outdoor toilets is not any place that you would dig up and put a person.
Right.
So that may be. Would it be in that kind of that location for some of the old buildings?
It may have been. It would have been a little bit lower than where the other building was. But when the WPA came in and did their surveys, and that one I think was walked in 1839, there were almost 200 unmarked graves. There were 228 marked graves and almost 200 unmarked graves at that time. Now there's over 1,000 graves that are 1,000 because that's all had that addition.
Do you feel like some of those have been marked?
The unmarked ones? No.
Oh, that's
sad. I think they're just scattered out there. I said occasionally, and you've done the same thing, you'll find a reference like on a death certificate, and it'll say that they're buried in Calhoun, and then there's not a marker for that person, and so you can kind of your best guess that it would be buried next to somebody that is identified, but there's no way to know.
I'll never forget going to the cemetery with my mom in the 1980s when I first started showing an interest in this, and she took me down to Mount Carmel, and she stopped at Perry Clayton's grave. And then she went walking off, and she said, and this is Uncle this, and this is Uncle that. And I was just horrified because the graves weren't marked. There were just kind of little stones laying there. And I said, oh, Mom. And she said, but we know. Right. But we know.
Right.
And so we let generations of folks slip away without marking those graves. But about 1976, Mom purchased just little foot markers with names on them and put them on those graves. So I'm really pleased that she did that for future generations. But that's how that happened, is that those are my family members, and we'll always know.
I have a great-grandfather who's buried somewhere in the Hopeful area. We think we know where the graveyard is, but it's unmarked. We really don't know.
Right. We know he's there, and we've talked about getting the cemetery to just let us put a marker in there.
And we had the same thing happen. Actually, when you said that about where some of them identified, they were identified by my mother because she knew where her family members were buried, and there were still two of her it was an aunt and uncle where they were, because she said her mom used to walk up there and she would point to them and show them where they were. And so within the last year, we've done the same thing, bought markers and marked those graves. We had the death certificates. We knew they were buried there, but
let me tell you folks, if you know that you have a Civil War soldier or any other military marker, I think, if the people that take care of the cemetery cannot request the markers now, it has to be a family member.
Right.
So if you know that you have someone and you'd like to get a marker, you need to go through whoever's operating the cemetery or keeping up with the cemetery, the trustees of the cemetery, and work on getting markers. Because it used to be the trustees could just ask for it. Well, now they're making family members, and that's given us a real headache down at Silverdale Cemetery, where those people did not live here. They were soldiers from other places that were sick and died, and we know who some of them are, but they don't have markers, and we can't find their families.
Good morning. You're live on Old Town Cleveland.
Yeah, right. I got one more question for Deborah, our guest. You ever heard of the cemetery Cedar Point?
What county is it in, hon?
Well, it's either Cedar Point or it's you know where Walker Valley High School is?
Yes.
You go west, and it's way up on the hill. I don't know. I'm not. That's what I was going to ask you. What part is it in? It's on the top of the hill there, and I've been there I covered graves there, and I think there's more graves in there, but it's.
Okay, it's. I'm looking in E.L. Ross's book. I didn't just find this in my brain. Center Point is the church and cemetery are located on top of Candies Creek Ridge on the Lower River Road from Charleston.
Oh, yeah, that's it. I just wondered whose. I didn't know if it's Charleston's or whose it was.
Mm-hmm. There are bunches and burgers, Ernest, Columns, Gibsons, lots of Gibsons buried in there.
I know one thing, it is rocky.
I bet it is when you start digging in it. But there looks like in 1971 they had marked approximately about 30 graves in there.
Well, I appreciate that.
Thanks. Somebody asked me the other day if I had been to every cemetery in this book, and the answer is no, but I've been to lots of them.
Deb, before we go on, I want to mention that a couple of things coming up that you need to put down on your calendars. September 19th, dirt track racing begins again in Cleveland, Tennessee. So
it's a Friday night, Lord willing, and they get everything fixed.
All new bleachers have been installed now. They're painting.
Along with handicap ramps.
Yeah, and new dirt on the track. So it's going to be on the 19th. That's a Friday night. The racing will now be on Friday nights in Cleveland instead of the Saturday night. Boyd Speedway in Cleveland has now switched positions there. So if you're a race fan, try to go out and support them. They spent a ton of money getting ready for you folks to come down there. And I kidded with them. They needed extra hot dogs that night because there's going to be a lot of people there.
Going to be a lot of people.
And then if you're not into racing and you've never watched a polo match, the polo is coming on the 13th, 14th, and then the next weekend would be the 20th, 21st, I guess if my math's right. Be 2 weekends of that absolutely free at Benabout Farms on South Lee Highway. I've been a couple times now, and
I had a hard time getting him to go, and then after you went, what did you think?
It is amazing sport, and it's fast. You'll be enjoyed. Great facilities down there. You
will enjoy.
Yes, that too.
And it's been going on, we think, from the 1930s.
Right.
Wow. One day they kind of have a little guy standing there with a bucket, and you could throw some couple dollars in there if you want to. It benefits the 6th Army.
6th Cavalry down at Fort Oglethorpe's Museum down there.
They played against them for a long time, and so they kind of support their cause. And
usually there are free drinks there. Coca-Cola products.
Coca-Cola products.
Definitely Coca-Cola products. So bring your children down there. And it doesn't cost a dime to get in. It's absolutely free Cokes, and great entertainment, beautiful horses. And
I suggest you bring a lawn chair. They do have quite a few bleachers, but they fill up quickly.
Well, some people have blankets and have little picnics out there on the side and everything. It's pretty.
And you'll see
neat.
everything from somebody in overalls with no shirt on to the women dressed up with the big hats on. So, just whatever you want to wear, just come on out. It's quite entertaining. And we think we're going to have Matt Bentley, that's the Benabout Farms manager, on.
He will come in on around the week before that. Our early edition we'll do from 9 to 9:45 if we have power. And we could have probably done the early edition today and then couldn't done the regular part here.
Mm-hmm. All right, Miss Laura, time's running short. Tell us something else.
Well, I said we were talking about veterans, and so as an outgrowth of the interest in the War of 1812 markers, none of those were identified. It made me curious about how many other veterans were in the cemetery that were in, not unmarked is not really the term, but it would be unrecognized as being having military service. And so first I looked to see about the vote for secession. I was curious about the Civil War and about the veterans, because the only marked veterans from the Civil War were Union soldiers. And I've got some notes here. There were 8 of them, and 6 of them had marked military graves. And so, but the vote to secede in Calhoun, the vote was 132 to 4. 97% of the voters voted to secede from the Union. So did it make any sense there wasn't one Confederate soldier in the cemetery? No. And so I went back and researched. You've used Fold 3 before, I'm sure, and identified that there were actually 17 Confederate soldiers that are buried in there, and they just returned back. And of course, that was at the time that the Union was paying for the Union markers. They were not paying for Confederate markers. Later they have done that. But those people just returned back home and were buried in their family plots. When you go find where they're buried, they're
Now,
buried.
You know, a lot of times it was people who had no money turned and got the military markers. Maybe not always, but sometimes that's the case.
Now, just as we just found this out in the last couple of weeks, if a family member requests the marker, even from Confederacy now, can get the marker.
But even for a grave that's already marked, like it has a private marker there.
I don't know about that.
I don't know. It's something we need to find out. But
I think it's if you have no marker.
I think it is.
How
if you
many
have no
Confederate soldiers are there that have no marker?
There, you mean that are totally unmarked?
Totally.
Well, not. I don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know.
We have 17
right,
that don't have that. Well, and say that's something the daughters, the Confederacy might be interested in.
Oh, that reminds me. The Confederate Monument downtown's getting a cleaning today. Might be kind of interesting to watch that little guy get his britches washed after all these years.
If you've not seen a monument washed, then don't go out and wash your tombstones either. Please don't do that kind of stuff.
You know, there's a fella got in all kinds of trouble a few weeks ago, and he thought he was doing something good. He scrubbed really old markers up, was it Jonesboro or Johnson City, somewhere up in the upper East Tennessee, with a steel brush to take pictures for Find a Grave.
And it pretty much had eliminated what was still there.
Yeah, or just did some terrible damage, but didn't. I mean, he wasn't being malicious, but he did get in trouble because he was defacing.
Some people use chalk, and then, of course, Laura, you talked about wrapping it in aluminum foil and then brushing that lightly and make that indenture into the aluminum foil. Then you could take a very good picture.
Right, and you can take a picture, and then I put that on Find a Grave.
So that is a great idea.
You know, I've put powder. I mean, I've put baby powder on them. I put flour on them. I try to do something that when I leave there, at least when it rains, it washes it off. I know one time I got somewhere, and all I had was bright pink chalk, and I was just kind of apologizing. I'm so sorry I'm doing this, but I've got to take a picture for a lady in Utah, you know.
Yeah, there was a marker that on the WPA record, so that was in, 1939, that it had the name and said that the rest of the stone was illegible. And do you know that when we unburied the stone and I took that trick and laid the foil over it, I could read all of it except one number off of it. And so it was something they couldn't read that far back, and but that worked. So if there's anybody out there that is interested, it really is.
We're headed to Walmart to buy aluminum foil now. I'm almost positive.
You know, and I have found that if I hold my camera up at an angle, and I can't see it with my eyes, but when I take it with that digital camera, I can read it sometimes. But it's so sad to think, well, I know you're here somewhere, but where are you?
And then she puts it on that 32-inch monitor and increases it, you know. And
well, now, and I'm sure it has been, that someone has mapped that cemetery.
Yes. And that's another project. I've started mapping. I do have the Shiloh Cemetery totally mapped.
Yes.
I finished it, and we've got almost every marker on Find a Grave now, and so I have that one mapped out. And the Calhoun Cemetery, I have all that old section mapped, and the Saw Paw corner, and I've been given a copy of anything that the Cemetery Association had available for the rest of that. And so we're planning on finishing that up. And I just have to give kudos to that Calhoun Cemetery Association for keeping up both of those cemeteries. They're,
I'm really curious about those graves over in the tree line. What would we need to do to clean that up?
Well, I think Joe Bryan, he's been talking with some of the city about trying to get in there to clean it out. Part of it, there's trees. Part of it's just underbrush. But back to the snake issue, we were going to wait until the
a little
foliage
while.
died
Good
back
idea.
again.
Well, I would just.
Leaves a mystery.
It's a mystery. Well, Laura, yeah, we know you live over in the Middle Tennessee. You don't get over this way real often, but we want you to
spend 2 hours with us.
Yeah. And were you involved in the Hiwassee? Is it Hiwassee Baptist Church? The recording of their records, or
yes, I did help with that transcription.
We'll have to get Joe to come on.
We got one more call here,
and let's talk about that church.
Go ahead, call. You're live on Old Town Cleveland.
All right, I just have a quick question. I was trying to wait to the end, so I wouldn't interrupt. But is there a registry that you can pull up somewhere, like on the computer, and say to find your families and stuff in the different things instead of having to go to the county itself and go to...
Are you talking about finding a grave?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, there's a website called findagrave.com, and it's free to use. And if you go over, it'll say it has so many million listings of graves. And sometimes you can get really lucky, and someone has taken the pictures of the whole graveyard. If there's markers there, that's where I'd start. My second place to go would be Ancestry.com. Now they charge for that. I'm not 100% sure, but at some point in time, if you had a Cleveland Public Library card, you could go to the history branch and log on for free if you had your library card with you, and you could you can search your families there. The first thing that you need to do, and you sound a little bit young, first thing you need to do is sit down with anybody that cares about your family and write down every single thing that they tell you. Record them. Get copies of their pictures, which is easy to do now. You can just take it with your digital camera, and once they realize you're not wanting to leave their house with the pictures, they'll pull out all kinds of pictures. Get history from those folks that are living now, and you'll be amazed at things that they know that you will never be able to find in the public records.
Well,
what's your family members? What family names would you be looking for?
Stamp.
What name?
Like a postage stamp.
No, like their last names.
Stamp.
I'm sorry, Stamp. Woo, sometimes it's hard to tell on here. Stamp. Okay, and where did you think they lived?
Oh, it's not local. It was just elsewhere. I was just wondering if there was...
I'd start with findagrave.com and set aside a couple hours because you'll get interested. And I know that Ron and I, somewhere along the way, they started asking us to post pictures from Fort Hill Cemetery, and I think there's 17,000 graves up there on just the historic side. And I think they want a picture of everything up there. But there are people who have taken all the pictures. They just haven't been loaded up yet.
And
like my husband's family is the parishes in Polk County.
Okay.
And I think that his uncle has pretty much done their family history.
What you need to do is show a lot of interest and see what you can get copies of, because it's always best to have 2 copies of everything in different places. And somebody in the family, like you, need to start writing it all down and getting it in some kind of form to share it.
And also in a lot of areas, a historical society, a genealogical society, they print books like Mr. E.L. Ross did that here. He has a graveyard book here, and you may be lucky and find those too.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you.
Stay after it. All righty. Bye-bye. Well, Ron, our hour and 20 minutes flew by today.
And as we always close, and Debbie started that, is you got to save your history. Get the pictures from out of the drawers and out of the shoe boxes and under the beds, and get someone in your family on a white label, write on it, then peel it off and stick it on the back of the picture. Share those pictures with people. You'll be surprised what an old picture of your grandfather, what kind of memory that brings back. We got one more caller here. Go ahead, caller.
Yeah, Ron, play me my song, John Anderson.
Swinging?
Yes.
I'll put it on there. It'll be after we get out of here.
Yeah. Bye, sweetie. Thank you.
They don't even put it on during the week. I haven't heard that you played it for me, guys.
Well,
I don't know what I'd do without you.
Well, I'm glad you feel that way.
Well, I certainly do.
We don't know what we would do without people like you either.
Well, I appreciate that. But I listen to you every Saturday morning. I get up and get things going, and I take my time and sit down. But this morning, we didn't have no radio, and I was very disappointed.
Well, the power...
we were sitting here in the dark. We were disappointed, too.
We thought they had paid the power or something.
Okay, well, I'm going to shut up and let y'all go on.
Bye, sweetie.
Bye-bye. We're going to... We'll play Swinging for her, definitely. We also will save those pictures. Share them with people. Talk to the oldest person in your family. Write it down. Record it. We got to do something. And Deb, as we always say, we'll always remember Pearl Harbor, but
will we remember Aunt Pearl? See you guys next week. Bye bye.
We'll see you then. Bye bye.
That little lady is the one. I think that's either Eddie.
You are listening to WOOP-LP, Cleveland, Tennessee. WOOP FM is a broadcasting service of the Traditional Music Resource Center, and we play America's original music.
Check into Checking to Cash.
The cash you need is closer than you think.
Get an auto title loan today for up to $2,500 at Check Into Cash.
You drive home with the cash in your pocket.
Visit Check Into Cash for an auto title loan today, or get a payday advance for up to $425. Call toll-free 877-262-CASH. Title loan amount determined by value of car and ability to repay. Borrowers often use payday advances over a period of months, which can be expensive. Restrictions apply. See store for details.
Wheeler Technologies has moved. Visit them at their new location at 490 Grove Avenue Southwest next to Bradley Rentals. Same great folks, same great service with a better location to serve you. Call Wheeler Technologies for voice, data, and security needs at 664-TECH. That's 664-8324. And remember, depend on Wheeler Technologies for the current time and temperature every day at 476-1111. Tennessee Alarm Contractor C1750.
Because I am a wild and crazy girl. Well, I was born into the world of pick and grin. I married a woman that's born to shop and spend. Lord help, that woman loves to shop. She's a bargain hunter through and through. I've seen her spend $50 trying to save $2. Lord have mercy, my woman was born to shop. Born to shop, born to shop. When it comes to spending money, she can't stop. If you'd like to know what I'm talking about, just drive her to the mall and turn her out. Boys, ain't no doubt, Sweetie was born to shop. Choosing her favorite seems to be hard between Visa Discover and MasterCard. She got a handful of plastic she gets out of the truck. I know she don't mean no harm. She don't quit shopping, we're gonna lose a farm. It beats all I've ever seen. Sweetie was born to shop. Born to shop. Born to shop. When it comes to spending money, she can't stop. She got 3 closets full of nothing to wear and can't do a thing with her old